God bless you. Welcome to part 3 of our day in Enduring Sound Doctrine. Thanks for joining me once again. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 2. And I, brethren, there again is that wonderful admonition, that wonderful appellative, calling them brothers. Remember, all the words in the original God-breathed word have intent and purpose, whether they're small or large. And we learn not to just skim over these terms, but stop and recognize, and ties it together with the previous, he that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord, which is a quote from the great Jeremiah 9:23 and 24. And I, brethren, again, very tender, very resonant, very rich, reminding them of his love, because reproof does follow, and yet reminding them of his care and concern for them. And I, brethren, when I came to you. Now, this would refer to the record we got into briefly in Acts 18, when he first came to Corinth, when he met Aquila and Priscilla, when he first brought the word to that great city. When I came to you, came not with excellency of speech. Excellency is preeminence, elevated, elite. Speech is logos, the word declared. I came not with preeminent word, logos, or of wisdom, declaring unto you the mysterion. Testimony is the Greek word mysterion, the mystery of God. He reminds them he could have brought more of the truth, but because of their spiritual immaturity, some of that just new in the Word, some of that because of the infiltration of the culture in its distractions, in its destructions, in its darkness, so deeply embedded. He had to stick with fundamentals, for I determined. He had to make a decision and hold his tongue not to know anything among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And that's a real discipline. Obviously, God was working in him. He observed their lives. He observed their strengths and weaknesses. He certainly appreciated their enthusiasm to hear. If you look back with me, keep your finger here to Acts 18 and read of the time to which he's referring. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth and found a certain Judean named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius, the emperor, had commanded all Judeans to depart from Rome, and came unto them. And because he, Paul, was of the same craft, he abode with them, and worked. For by their occupation, King James says they were tent makers. The Aramaic clarifies it, and Dr. Werwell taught this a number of times over the years. They were saddle makers. The men made saddles, the women made purses and tents. Very interesting that Paul had this trade among all his incredible intellectual training as a Hebrew of Hebrews, trained of the top Pharisees of his day from a young man. He also had a trade. This was so much part of Dr. Werwell's heart on the Way Corps, that not only the greatness of the Word was taught, but that all of us worked certain 4-hour-a-day jobs and developed skills and resources whereby we could earn a living. If the believers' abundant sharing was not sufficient in the areas we went to to support us. And all of us that have stood for any time have certainly had this experience, that we needed to labor for our own body and soul need. And therefore, it's a wonderful tenet, wonderful truth regarding the ministers in the book of Acts, like Paul. And he reasoned, here's our word dialegomai again, to converse to and fro. He dialogued in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded. This word persuaded especially means to persuade by winning words, winning, W-I-N-N-I-N-G, winning words. In other words, it wasn't a message of condemnation. It wasn't a message of obligation. It wasn't a message of legalism. So it would have caught the attention of those raised under the legalistic standards. Winning words, that's what we teach. Persuaded the Judeans and the Greeks, reaching both categories. And when Silas and Timotheus were come from Macedonia, Paul was pressed in the Spirit. Now, this takes a little text work here. Pressed means engrossed, enamored, engrossed in reverie, on fire. This usage of spirit is to be omitted, and it should read enamored in the word, logos, and testified, dia martus, witnessed to the to the Judeans that Jesus was Christ. Now the significance of this verse 5, Dr. Wierwille, in his work on chronology and the dating of the epistles, was absolutely convinced that this, it's somewhere around 52 and 53 A.D., 22 to 23 years after the day of Pentecost. This is when it says he was pressed or engrossed, enamored in the Word, this is when God gave him the revelation we know as Thessalonians, Acts 18:5. Magnificent. He's in Corinth, so he would have had to have had the physical surroundings conducive to such in-depth thinking, such revelation. Would have had his need met. Now he's still working. Aquila and Priscilla, of course, would have been a big part of that. More than likely, they lived under the same roof. They made their tents, their saddles, other leather goods, earned their keep. And when he had time, and especially on the Sabbath, he would go to the synagogue where people that had a concern for the word of life could be spoken to. And as perhaps you've heard over the years, the tradition in the synagogues, the Judean synagogues of the day, was that any time a man or woman of learning would visit, or I don't know about the women, but the men, maybe women too in some cases, if they were recognized as men of learning, and Paul would have had that reputation, they were allowed to share with the congregation. There's records of that in detail in other parts of Acts. So he knew he had a door of utterance by way of the customs of the culture. He knew once the priest was finished with what he was sharing that he would be invited to speak. And this is when his energized ministries went into operation. So at this time, working for a living in his body, soul, having doors of utterance to speak, and yet still, you talk about redeeming the time, had the time and the energy and the resource of body and soul and spirit to receive the revelations of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. It's really quite a remarkable context to reflect upon in the great city of Corinth. So he would have had a tender place in his heart for Corinth for many reasons. That would certainly be a big one. This is the only epistle written previous to the 8th section of the book of Acts. The only epistle written in the 7th. All the rest were written in the 8th, including the Timothys and Titus, Philemon and Hebrews, and the balance of the 6 were written during the 8th or regeneration section of Acts that commenced in Acts 19:21. So, verse 6, and when they oppose themselves, isn't that unique wording? When they're opposing the word, they are opposing themselves. Likewise in our day. When they walk away from the energized reality of the truth of our election of grace and our remnant, they are opposing their own best interests. They are following old nature appetite, old nature attitude, old nature legalisms, and indeed private and personal darkness. They oppose their own best interests when they walk away from this word that we hold forth. And when they oppose themselves and blaspheme, literally means to speak evil of sacred things. And of course, number one on sacred things is the word, magnified above all his name, energized by the charismata gifts of God's grace in authentic ministries of service for the perfecting of the saints. When they speak in opposition to that, it is blasphemy. He shook his raiment, Orientalism. Sometimes they tore their mantle to express grief or sorrow at unbelief, hard-heartedness. He shook his raiment, would be along the lines of shaking the dust off, and said unto them, your blood, your contaminated blood, I would add, be upon your own heads. Boy, he waxed bold there. I am clean. From henceforth I will go unto the Gentiles. He had it with the Judeans in Corinth. There was so much opposition engendered. And this was God's closing of the revelation to the Judean, at least in these particular synagogues. And he departed thence, entered into a certain man's house named Justus, one that worshiped God, whose house joined hard right next door to the synagogue. So there must have been Judeans in other places. He left that place and shook the raiment, said, your blood be upon your own heads. Take the responsibility of your own corrupt nature and the consequences therein. And Crispus, the chief ruler of the synagogue, how about that? Believed on the Lord with all his house. Wonderful. And many of the Corinthians, hearing, believed, and were baptized. As you know, baptized had nothing to do with water. Baptized is a figure of speech. It certainly could, it refers in remembrance to John baptizing Jesus in the Jordan, but since the baptism of Holy Spirit replaced the baptism of John, which Jesus prophetically told them on the day of the ascension, from now on, unless it specifically says it was in water, like we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, then you cannot read water into the text. It's private interpretation. It's a figure of speech of immersion, but it's referring to the new birth, being born again, immersed in the all-in-all inner man, and having the capability to stir living water within them by speaking in tongues. You see how quickly private interpretation can jump you if you're not careful reading these different terms. Then spake the Lord to Paul. Wow, watch this. In the night. It doesn't say he was asleep. It says in the night. People want to read dreams into this. What a bunch of baloney malarkey is the whole realm of dream interpretation. You talk about a waste of time. Dreams basically come from the old nature, not the new. They want to tell you it's from your subconscious. Yeah, that's the old nature. They want to tell you your subconscious is where the creativity of a person comes. What a damn lie that is. And the whole world buys it. And they want to tell us that if you're really creative, then you're in the arts somehow. That's the only real creative people, you know. You got to be a writer or a painter or a dancer or some homo tap dancer, that you're the real creative spiritual people. What a bunch of malarkey. The only creative people are the ones that speak in tongues and energize the gift divine into the other effects produced. That's creative. Whether it's expressed in the arts, who cares? The greatest creativity is in rightly dividing the word of truth. This is the greatest act of creativity you and I are ever going to see. Now, if someone can do those other things, like I like to write, fine. But it's rightly dividing the word that's the greatest creativity in life, that he magnified above all his name. The receiving, retaining, and releasing. That's where true creativity is engendered. They talk about their 9 muses that inspire creative works. The 9 muses are just a counterfeit of the 9 manifestations. Another thing from this contaminated Greek culture that dominated this time in Acts 18. We just read of it in the Mars Hill confrontation. Ye are reverent to many devils, he told them. See, creativity. Boy, watch how they use that word. Always be sharp on that one. Creativity is energizing the gift. It's a creative act, which I write about in my book, Bestow More Abundant Honor. It's literally an act of creation, because every message God energizes is created, putting it on your spirit, and you speak it forth in your private prayer life. That's creativity. Dreams are from the old nature. And you'll see more and more, the deeper you get into the Word, the less and less you will dream. And you can just, already you know that. And indeed, even if you do still dream, if your mind is stirred into that kind of thing, they're essentially harmless. They're essentially harmless, and essentially you don't hardly remember them the next day anyway. But the deeper you get into the Word, the less you have these terrible nightmares, they call them, or dreams. And for God's sake, you're not getting revelation in your dream world. That's the biggest bunch of malarkey ever palmed off on gullible people, I tell you. Now, there is in the Old Testament, and I'm not thinking of it right now, but perhaps even in the New, there can be revelation in what we would call a dream while you're asleep. But it's in the category of phenomena, and phenomena is essentially a very rare experience that you cannot put any dependency in. It's when God goes beyond the written word. And the written word does not teach to expect revelation from the true God in your dream world. It does not teach that. So again, Paul, in the night, he was wide awake by a vision. It's nighttime now, isn't it? Yeah, I'm awake. It's night. I could get a vision. Be not afraid. So he heard it. It calls it a vision. So he saw something. It doesn't tell us what he saw, but because it says it was a vision, something was in concretion as the Spirit of God worked in him and communicated to his thought patterns. But he also heard. So he had the visual and the auditory in the inner nature, in the Christ within. Be not afraid, but speak, and that word is to speak by inspiration. And hold not thy peace. That's further establishing, because he'd had some trouble stirred up. For I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee. Well, it must have been threatening in the situation. For I have much people in this city. There's many there waiting to hear. He'd won some, but this reassured him to stay put. What a revelation. Without that specific word of wisdom, word of knowledge, then perhaps he would have decided to move on. But this revelation, by golly, it held him fast. And he continued. He remained there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the Word of God among them. This is what he's referring to in 1 Corinthians 2. Still was great word. He was teaching the significance of the sacrificial act of their Passover lamb. Just because it says he taught, what does it say, Christ crucified? Is that what it says? I forgot. No, Jesus. Jesus Christ and him crucified. Okay, Jesus Christ and him crucified. And that especially because it says Jesus in his humiliated form, but as the anointed one, it means he was teaching them the significance of the act of laying down his life. It doesn't mean he was just teaching them what we know as the gospel accounts. He was teaching them, I'm sure he referred to what we know as the gospel accounts, but then he took it further into the significance of the new birth, our sins being paid for as the perfect Passover, and the blood he shed, those kind of truths. I think you could relate to it by the way he wrote his book, Jesus Christ, Our Passover. Dr. Wirbel's great work on how the significance of the last 2 weeks of Jesus Christ's life, fulfilling the law, performing his responsibilities to fulfill every jot and tittle, into the significance of his death, resurrection, and ascension. But he was determined to withhold himself from going into the excellency, the preeminent logos of the truths of the great mystery revealed, because they were not ready for that as yet. And to get them ready, God had him to write this epistle of reproof, correcting practical error. Do you see it tying together? And when Gallio was the deputy of Achaia, it's like the governor, the Judeans made insurrection with one accord against Paul and brought him to the judgment seat. I can imagine him reminding himself of the revelation in vision and in hearing that the true God had given him. He was certainly claiming that when he was arrested and brought into this challenging circumstance, saying, "This fellow persuadeth men to worship God contrary to the law." And when Paul was now about to open his mouth, Gallio said unto the Judeans, he's the secular governor, if it were a matter of wrong or wicked lewdness, O ye Judeans, you religious fanatics, reason would that I should bear with you. But if it be a question of words and names and of your law, look ye to it, for I will be no judge of such matters. And he ran them off. He drove them from the judgment seat. Watch this. Then all the Greeks took Sosthenes. I'm not sure I understand what's going on here, because it's the Judeans that were so angry. The Greeks took Sosthenes. Remember him? He's mentioned in the salutation of Corinthians. The chief ruler of the synagogue. Well, down there in verse 8 it says, Crispus, chief ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his house. This was either another synagogue where another chief believed, or it could be the same man referred to with two different names. I just don't know. But why the Greeks got all shook up They must have been hacked off. This can't be the Greeks that believed. Has to be the unbelieving Gentiles. Unless there's a textual issue, I don't know. Then all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the chief ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat. And Gallio cared for none of these things. That is important because he classified what they did in the same category previous as just some religious controversy that he didn't want anything to do with. Thinking it through further with what I know from 1 Corinthians 1 verse 1, where Sosthenes is honored in the salutation, I believe Sosthenes gave himself up to the rage of the crowd to protect Paul. That's right. I believe that's why he is singled out in 1 Corinthians 1 verse 1. The revelation was that I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee. It looks to me like he's about ready to get hurt. Sosthenes stands in the gap, gives himself up to that raging crowd, and takes that beating. Clearly, he had stepped forth as a believer of the ministry of Paul. This is how Paul was spared from being beaten. This is how God was able to fulfill the revelation. Sometimes that's what men and women have to do. They have to take the brunt of an attack, whether it's physical, verbal, emotional, spiritually. We've all stood in the gap for others and suffered for it in our body, soul. I've never experienced this, quite this, but that guy did. Bless his doggone heart. And no wonder Paul names him in 1 Corinthians 1:1. I don't know any other way to handle it, and I don't know of any time it's ever been handled as accurately as I just taught it to you. Through the will of God. And Sosthenes, what he call him? Our brother. See, appreciating the significance of an Eastern man of God, calling a man brother. I'll guarantee you that was honor and recognition that Sosthenes will be rewarded for throughout all eternity. He stood in the gap for his brother, Paul. I remember the first time Dr. Orwell looked me in the eye and called me a great man of God. And it made me shiver from the top of my head to my toes, because I know he didn't throw that phrase around lightly. And there's my experience that I try to remember when I read what he said in Corinthians of Sosthenes, the chief ruler of the synagogue. It doesn't say he died. I'm sure great healing came to pass for him. But verse 18 says, and Paul after this tarried there yet a good while. The rage of the possessed crowd. Mob rule is a devil spirit called perverse spirit. The suborning, the bribing to evil acts. We read in other records of lewd fellows of the baser sort. Back in chapter 17, were bribed by the chief priests. This had to be in that category too. But it released the violent rage. The spirits departed, and Paul had smooth sailing. Tarried there yet a good while. In other words, the rage and the mob rule that the spirit realm wanted to stir up and wanted for it to last, Paul's revelation and his believing of it and the intercession spiritually by revelation, I believe, boy, I'm getting wound up here, of Sosthenes is what negated that rage. He took on that rage and even physically had to be beaten to do the job. Sure, If there had been a better way to get it done, I'm sure our loving Father would have done it. But I'm sure he healed that man up, and the rewards of eternity mentioned in the salutation of the grace epistle Corinthians. I'm sure Sosthenes never regretted acting on that revelation. See, I experienced this once when we were in Canada. We were trying to set up a training center in Canada, and we went and found a beautiful home, and we decided we'd try it out. Dr. Earl sent me up there, had a bunch of I took some core with me. We had some Canadian believers with us. Dr. Earl wanted us to do a march downtown when we had resistance. People were afraid. They thought we were a cult. There was a lot of religious churches coming at us, calling us names. So we did a little parade. We made placards. We made posters. We set ourselves up for ridicule and accusation and walked right downtown in this city. I don't remember the name of the city. Was it London? I don't remember. But it was quite an experience. We had a lot of people cussing us and swearing at us. It was all, we were believing God that it didn't get physical. Never got physical. But later, after that parade, I did an open meeting at a university, and I was in this lecture hall, and they were all lined up in the back, 4 or 5 biblical scholars with all their books open, and they were ready to debate, ready to argue. And I had Way Productions with me, and we did some music to try to soften the crowd up a bit. So I started trying to teach, and one of them stood up, one of these intellects, and said, "What gives you the right to know all this? What kind of graduate degrees do you have?" "I have a doctorate degree in theology." And I just looked at him and said, "Sir, I have no graduate degree. I don't have a graduate degree in theology. I have a simple diploma from the Way Corps and a Bachelor of Theology. I didn't learn this from your great theological school." And the guy went, "Oh," and he sat down and shut up. It was just the perfect thing to say. The Spirit of God worked in me. It just knocked the spirits to numbness, and it shut them up the rest of the meeting. I taught for about 30 minutes. That's about all I could stand because the spiritual hatred coming at me was so intense. I could feel it in my physical body. And I knew I couldn't prolong the meeting too much longer, or it could erupt into something violent. So I closed it down. I turned away Productions, and I said, "Let's get the hell out of here." I walked to the side stage, and I'll never forget it. God hit me right in the heart. He said to me, "That's what it means to absorb hatred with the love of God in your heart." I'd never thought of it until that moment. That gnosko experience is where I learned that. That's what Sosthenes did. I guess that's the closest I've ever come to being physically assaulted from a group. And, of course, you know, knowing me, I'd have been swinging back at him. I wouldn't have left. But Father said, "Get going." So I always remember that. Turned away Productions. "Let's get the hell out of here." And they were in full agreement. They had already basically packed up their stuff. And Father hit me with that in my heart as I walked out of there. I still remember what that place looked like. That's where he taught me that. Bless his heart. That's why I think I can understand this record. Sosthenes, and why God had Paul to name him. My goodness. And look, Paul this tarried yet there a good while, and then took his leave of the brethren, and sailed thence into Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila, etc., etc. This is the record to which he refers in his first visit when he says, "For I determined," and back in 1 Corinthians 2, I stayed my mind and renewed my mind not to know anything among you save the significance of Jesus Christ crucified and the significance of his believing actions. See, if he could have been coming speaking the mystery, it would have been with excellency of Logos, the preeminent Logos of the revelation of the Word. is this logic and wording of Ephesians, which he later had the joy to write, but he was already thinking and teaching these things. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. Now, this is interesting. I can give you a few ways to look at this. Number one, does it mean literally in his mind weakness and fear which led to much trembling? Could that refer to the mob, the assault, the threats? It may, but I would like to propose something else because of the adamancy and the clarity of that revelation God gave him in the night, that no man would hurt him. And it says in there, he was ready to step forward and take them on and speak. But God orchestrated the scenario through the politician Galileo, who dismissed the crowd. And then Sosthenes stepped forward with great believing boldness and took the brunt of the mob and allowed Paul to escape. I would rather say that this is a figurative reference to the comparison of what it would have meant if he could have spoken with excellency of Logos and the wisdom of the mystery. That compared to what he was only allowed to speak, he was in weakness and fear and trembling spiritually. Understand? Because I don't think the record of Acts bears out that he was terrified. I don't see him terrified. I see him bold, ready to take them on, and especially with that magnificent vision and revelation he received. I think verse 3 is figurative, a comparative reference to how magnificent it could have been if he had been allowed the green light, the door of utterance, to speak the truths of the great mystery revealed. But he had to determine not to know anything among them save Jesus Christ and him crucified. So you think about it. If there's another way to look at it, that's the best I can do with it right now. Verse 4, and my speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom. So he didn't go that route either. Remember the Greek intellectualism, which we see from verse 19 in the previous chapter. He had already declared, for it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise. I will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent, meaning in the secular wisdom of the Greeks. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world, this age? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For after that, in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. It pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. Boy, see. Where is the wisdom of this world? It's not here with us, is it? The greatness of the Word holds regnancy. I know it's out there. I know it's all over the place. It's all over your internet feeds. It's all over TV. It's all over the malarkey talk in other places. But it's got nothing to do with you and me handling the Word here tonight. Where is it? It's nothing. All their false teaching has no impact as this Word is energized. And my speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom. It's just trickery, baiting you for a catch, just to use us for their greed and their arrogance, but in demonstration of spiritual power. He came forth with the manifestations energized in him, his ministries energized in their midst, that your believing should not stand in the wisdom of men. Well, when they believe there are three gods, it stands in the wisdom of men. When they believe they can pray to a saint who's graveyard dead, when they believe they can pray to their dead relatives, it's the wisdom of the doctrines and commandments of men. And he just said, that wisdom I will bring to nothing. No impact in godliness. But for us, our believing does not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the dunamis, the potentiality of the powers of God in the gift. Howbeit we speak. This word speak means to speak by inspiration, with extemporaneous power, and fully persuaded, winning words. We speak wisdom among them that are mature, perfect, teleos, mature. This is the purpose of 1 Corinthians, to correct their practical error so they can live up to the maturity whereby the great mystery in excellency of speech can be unveiled. And you see indications of that, of course, as we go through this epistle. Yet not the wisdom of this age, nor of the princes, that's the devil spirits, arche. Arche means the dignity of their position. They have dignity of authority in this world, run by the God of this world, their commander-in-chief. And for those that try to just ignore it, they are just as bad off as those that worship them. You can't ignore it. It's here. You deal with it according to your authority in Christ. But this includes recognizing the positions of authority within the hierarchy of the devil realm that the adversary does have. Nor of the arche, princes of this age, that come or are coming to naught. Yes, that is their future. And as we defeat them day by day, we give assurance and testimony to the ultimate defeat of the devil realm in the lake of fire. But we speak, again, by inspiration, the wisdom of God in a mysterion. See, it's like previews of coming attractions. I'm not able to get into the depth of the detail. I wasn't able when I first visited you. But look what's available if you will respond to this reproof, brethren. If you will respond to correcting your divisiveness, your selfishness, your narcissisms, your pride. If you will quit holding ministers as their own little groups against us, against each other. See, we don't have that in the remnant, but out there, it's not talking about our marking and avoiding. It's talking about within the believing, functioning church that were still listening to Paul, they had all these divisive things going on. But he said, if you will correct yourself in the wrong thinking and habits of life, get back to speaking in tongues more, get back to the utterance confirmed that you used to walk in, then I guarantee you the great hidden wisdom will pour forth to you. See? It's like previews, teasers of coming attractions of truth. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mysterion, even the hidden wisdom which God ordained before the ages, before this world, unto our glory, our manifested power. Watch this, which none of the princes of this world knew, for had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. What a truth from the ministry of an apostle. I remember the first time I heard him teach this in the foundational class. I was stunned. I'd never seen that before. And I was so thrilled. It was not made available in the sensus realm, so the spirit realm could not pick up on it. Now, we can read backwards. Knowing what we know now, we can now look at great records like Isaiah 28:11 and 12, and Isaiah 57:19, and other places that truly we know now refer to the revelation of the great mystery in our day, like the 7 pillars of Solomon, for instance, the 7 trees of Isaiah 41:18 to 20, and I can tie them to the 7 epistles. I have that right, I have that privilege, because he has unveiled these revelations. And those records are for our learning. But literally, the mystery still was hid in God, so the princes could not steal it. And it was so big and threatened them and intimidates them so hugely that they would have allowed Jesus Christ to stay alive, walking on earth. They would rather have the Messiah on earth than having all members in particular of the born-again body of Christ functioning with that Spirit of God in spiritual maturity, the wisdom among them that are mature. He would rather have left Jesus Christ alive on earth than face what we bring against him today. How do you like that for being a saint in Christ Jesus, heaven's holiest of all? But as it is written, quoting Isaiah, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things, what things? Context, the things of the mystery, the things of the great mystery which God hath prepared for them that love him. He's exhorting them. You listen to what I'm correcting. Get on the ball with me, and you will begin to see things that eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither has entered into the heart of man. Things that God hid from the spirit realm, but God hath revealed them. Apocalypsis, revelation unto us by his Spirit, gift and manifestation. For the gift and manifestation searcheth all things. Yea, talk about a figure of speech, yea, the deep things of God. That tells me there is no access to the deep things of the great mystery of God without the Spirit of God energized. First by speaking in tongues, after that the other effects produced. There is no access to the deep things of God without the Spirit of God energized in you. You can see why he's already hitting them on speaking in tongues in the first chapter. He's already laying the groundwork for further exhortations to correcting the usage of the manifestations in various scenarios and situations. Because without those properly and accurately and precisely operated maturely by seasoned saints, there is no access to the deep things of the mystery of God. And without that, you have no more than abundant life. You cannot be more than a conqueror. For what man? You cannot walk the more excellent way that he hits in 1 Corinthians 12:31. For what man knoweth the things of a man? It's a great illustration. Except the spirit of man, that soul life, which is in him, the spirit of man, your mind, your heart, your personality. Even so, the things also of God knoweth experientially no man, but the Spirit. Usage 1, the giver of God. Body, soul, man has no access. The carnal Christians have no access, as much as they want to say they do. Body, soul, man that brags about his creativity and his subconscious is so full of lies and malarkey, you could hardly use enough adjectives to describe it. You know, they like to tell you. You hear them say it all the time. Every human being has a good side and a bad side. That's a damn lie. Do you know that? Not every human being has a good side. Only the born again, body, soul, spirit, have access to light, to truth, to what they call good. They think everybody has a good and bad side. They only have a bad side. They only have a bad side. Corrupted blood, tainted, toxic, pathogenic, old nature shame. Oh, they justify it, they hem and they haw. They put on their papier-mâché, artificial, camouflaged ethics and morality and try to convince you and me that they're good people. Malarkey. They only have access to a good side after they get born again. And even then, most of them waste it. See? They have the potential for a good side. They have the potential to decide. But as Dr. Wirbel said, body, soul, man is no better than an animal. And when they get possessed, worse than an animal. No wonder the animal kingdom and its viciousness is used to describe the spirit realm. See how they just trick you into that logic? It sounds logical on the surface, but it's wrong spiritually. Well, anyway. Now, verse 12, we have lambanoed, not the spirit of the world. That's a usage 8, of course, a devil spirit. But in contrast, the Spirit, the gift, usage 2a, which is of or from God, that we might know experientially. Sorry, that's oida. That we might know, oida, the things. What things? Context, the things of the great mystery that are freely given to us of God. Why? By way of the gift. By way of Christ in you, the hope of glory, and the enablements therein. Which things, what things? The things of the great mystery. We speak also. Emphasis on speak. Again, it's the word laleo, means to speak by inspiration. Which things of the great mystery of God we speak also, not in the words which man's wisdom teaches. Again, he referred to the enticing words of the Greek wisdom that he confronted on Mars Hill. But words which pneumahagion in manifestation, usage 5, teacheth, comparing, what a truth this is, spiritual things with or by, the text reads, spiritual words. Compare spiritual things by the spiritual words of the things of the great mystery of God. That's how you keep yourself in full koinonia, fellowship, in godliness, walking in alignment and harmony. But the natural man, that's the suke, soul life only, receiveth not, dekomai, the things of the great mystery of the Spirit of God. Doesn't receive anything of God, just semblances and fringes and certain things like that. See, this doesn't negate the fact that they have those built-in immutable laws, laws of prosperity, laws of healing. He causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. This explains why sometimes body, soul, men and women can do good things, but not in the great essence of God in Christ working in them, because there are natural laws. Otherwise, they'd all die. They'd never live 5 minutes. Unless God, look how God made the human body to heal itself. You don't have to be born again for that to work. Now, it works better if you're born again and you're energizing the Spirit, that you quicken your mortal body. Absolutely. It's supercharged, turbocharged healing. But even within the body-soul, God designed the human body to heal itself. Otherwise, they wouldn't live beyond birth. They'd be dead as quickly. And, of course, no way for the world to function or people to have the opportunity to say yes or no to the true God. That would just, of course, be a ridiculous scenario. So God built in his immutable laws. He knew there'd be an author of death, that's exactly what he would try to do. But he's not allowed, because there are laws of believing and prosperity and health that allow even the unbeliever to experience those blessings. But of course, that experience many times is what leads people to finally acknowledge that there is a loving God of light, and gets people to the Word when they begin to wonder where these blessings are coming from, and why are these resources working for them. Many people have gotten born again when they finally got logical about that. Comparing spiritual things by spiritual words. Wow. He's not telling them in detail how to do it yet. Again, these are previews. These are incentives. These are rewards if they will be obedient to his loving reproof. Do you see that? But he's setting it forth. He's giving them a taste of the excellency of speech and of wisdom, of declaring the mystery of God. He's giving them a taste in broad strokes. Salesmen call it a big fat claim. You know, this soap will solve all your cleansing problems. See, the big fat claim, then he starts to enumerate how it does it. Well, these are big claims. They're not lies, they're truths. These are great, all-encompassing incentives to their obedience. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, the things of the mystery, because they are spiritually discerned. But he that is spiritual, that's you and me, that's where he wants the Corinthians to get, judgeth, investigates, and makes proper renderings, proper sentences on all things. Yet he himself is judged of no man. Context, what man? No natural man. And yet they're all trying to judge us, aren't they? They criticize our allegiances. They criticize our loyalties. They criticize our doctrines. They criticize our morals. They criticize our ethics. They criticize our opinions. Well, what has God done? He's made it naught, nothing. He's brought their understanding to nothing. I don't hear them now, do you? They're not interceding, interfering with us, are they? Nope. For who? Reason why. For who hath known the mind, nous, the entire reasoning mind of the Lord, that he may instruct him. Likewise, we have the mind, nous, the entire reasoning mind of Christ. Is that an incentive to respond to the gentle corrections of practical error of the great revelation called Corinthians, getting them back to the doctrine of Romans? Well, thank you for your wonderful love and your attention and your discipline to be with me in this day of enduring the great doctrines of the Word. I appreciate your prayers, your believing, your participation. I participate with you in believing. And I appreciate your taking this Word and working it further now to make it your own. I do plan on teaching for the rest of the month, the next 3 or 4 Saturdays, whatever it is in this February month. So thank you for planning to be with me the best you can, either live or on our playbacks. So again, this has been a great day. I'm just spiritually thrilled. I'm physically exhausted and spiritually thrilled. Maybe you feel the same way. So God bless you and thank you.